Mispronounce for an embarrassingly large portion of your life. When I was in high school, we read Slaughterhouse V, and the teacher explained that his repeated use of the phrase, "so it goes," was a literary device called a meme. Except she pronounced it mem. So when I was in college, the word meme suddenly became part of pop culture, and on more than one occasion, I corrected people with "actually, it's pronounced mem." Library. My mom purposely pronounced it library to piss her dad off. It became a habit, she said it that way around me, and I never really differentiated the sounds. Until 11th grade when someone told me I was saying it wrong. I always end up saying library, bureau, Greenwich, and more. More embarrassingly though, I thought an assassin was a female hitman and you at Assassin's Creed must have really confused you. She really puts the ass in assassin. Cash. I still think it shouldn't be pronounced the same as cash. Anime. I used to pronounce it as Ineem. Recently found it is pronounced as anime. Necklace, pronounced it as necklace wasn't until I was bullied by family and friends I pronounce it right. I also stumble in words sometimes, and it slipped out on people who didn't know, and they just laugh thinking I stumbled when I have to think about how it's pronounced before saying it. Not so much of wrongly pronouncing it, but rather over the years the wrong, or the American, pronunciation became acceptable, that I am now deemed to be the wrong one. For context, I am in an area where British English is the officially adopted one. Celtics, I pronounce Celtics, but Celtics seems to overwhelm me nowadays. Route, I am used to route, but nowadays kept being corrected it as route. Ambience, for some reason there's an increased incidence people are pronouncing it French, ambiance. Spelling of kleptomania. I read a lot growing up, so I feel like there are so many words I mispronounced in my head for years, but the one that sticks out to me is the name Penelope. I had only read the name, but loved it, and for years growing up, whenever there was a future baby name conversation this was a top pick, but I pronounced it to rhyme with cantaloupe. I remember my cousin correcting me once even, but I was sure she was wrong, and I was right, that I continued mispronouncing it for probably a couple more years. Sue, this is so embarrassing. My mom is from Mexico and moved to the States in her mid-20s, and she has a thick accent in English, so I picked up a particular word from her that I didn't know was incorrect. There's a kitchen utensil I'd been saying incorrectly till maybe 24 years old. At 24, I was in Hawaii with my older sister and a few friends and we couldn't find this particular utensil in our Airbnb, so I messaged the host asking where the spatula was. The host said I don't think we have that, and I was annoyed and confused because all kitchens have this. So I showed the text to my sister and she burst out laughing and corrected me, spatula. I was mortified. I didn't even want to message the host again to correct myself because there was just no way of covering up that mistake. Honestly, I don't even know what I did after that point. I think I've blocked out the memory. Not me, but have you ever heard of Benedict Cumberbatch? Penguins, 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 penguins. He never did learn how to properly say penguins. Awry. I knew of the correctly pronounced word awry, and if you asked me, I likely would have spelled it correctly. However, when reading it in a book, I would mentally read it RE, and in my head that was a separate word. Then one day I said RE out loud in conversation and got the strangest look. As soon as I pieced it together I felt oh so embarrassed. My father was born and raised in Alabama. For the large majority of his life he called fettuccine, fettuccine. When he was about 30 he took a girlfriend out to a fancy Italian restaurant and was promptly corrected. He told me that his girlfriend couldn't stop laughing the entire date. Turns out that this person was my adoptive mother. Fatigue. I was raised in a household that speaks both French and English, so when the word was used, it was used in the French context. I didn't realize that the English version was not pronounced fatty-gay, so when I was asked to read aloud in English class in high school, I got a few weird looks, and for the rest of the month, I was known as fatty gay. Maybe I am still mispronouncing it, but pawn. Here in Australia, we don't really use that word. Pawn and porn sound exactly the same to me. My husband is American though, and while talking to his mum over the phone one day, I told her we went to a pawn shop. She went oddly quiet until he snatched the phone off me and said she means pawn shop. Apparently I said it like porn. Still, with Aussie accents the word sounds exactly the same to me. The few times I've said the word to people on that side of the family, I have to pause and say it carefully. Apparently I say it right now, but again. Still sounds exactly the same to me, lol. I pronounced mustache as mustache. In my defense, English isn't my first language, and I learned the word in French before I learned it in English. I have no ties to French either. For some reason, my elementary school in the Middle East taught French. I don't know any other elementary school here that does that. And I was terrible at the French and had a terrible teacher, so I don't even know if mustache is correct. I was laughed at pretty hard when I first tried to use mustache in an English-speaking conversation. Daniel Burnham was an architect whose ever-shifting style and aesthetic made him a true architectural chameleon. And only the most gifted chameleon could have designed classic Beaux Arts masterpieces right alongside sleek modern flatirons. His name might as well have been Daniel Chameleon. Professor? Do you mean chameleon? Betty, I'm pretty sure it's pronounced chameleon. Students nod no. Class dismissed. No homework for a while. As I had never, up until recently, I am in my 60s, had any reason or medical requirement for the test, I always thought in my mind that endoscopy was pronounced endoscopy, almost two words, rather than its correct pronunciation. I didn't find out until I was at the hospital and asked a passing porter where the department was. He looked at me and said, "Oh, you mean the endoscopy, correct phrasing, ward, yeah it's." Sadly, at my age, whether you need it or not, you will be invited along to experience this little treat for yourself, then repeat every 2 years. Hearing impaired guy here. I still can't hear or say the S sound. I honestly hear and say it as TH. Now for the funny stuff. I called my older cousin Brett until I was 10 and finally realized it was the wrong word. Guitar was always jitter. This is just a tip of the iceberg. If my hearing aids aren't giving me a strong signal, I always make a joke of what I thought I heard versus what was said. Helps to have a strong sense of humor about it. Well, not my whole life, but a couple years. As a teenager, I had an online friend and his real name was Jeff. We finally got mix and played online and talked. I always called him Geoff because that's how I had read his name and never heard it pronounced. I didn't realize it was Jeff until I thought about it years later. For close to 2 years I called him Geoff, but he never corrected me though. I do not know whatever happened to Ole Geoff. My brother-in-law pronounced jalapeno as jalapeno. We were all on a phone call and said, "I'm eating these chips, they're really good." When asked what they were, he replied, "They're called jalapeno," and my sister and I were like, "Wait, are you serious?" He was very embarrassed to learn that jalapeno is pronounced with an H and spelled with a J. We were all between the ages of 16 to 19. Edit, fix the accented letter in jalapeno. Chaos. I pronounced it chaos, where the U sounds like the letter. Epitome. That one, I am sad to say, I only learned how to say properly recently. I'm 37. Also, how do you pronounce Sichuan? Mike Chen on YouTube pronounces it citron, at least, I think that's the word he means when he says citron, but I've heard other Chinese people pronounce it exactly how it is spelled. And the Rick and Morty sauce at McDonald's was marketed in my area with it pronounced as it sounds, so maybe I am completely wrong about what I think Mike is talking about when he says citron-style food. Help? Grilled cheeses as grilled cheese. Crayon is crown. I still pronounce pillow as pellow, so I've been told, and England as Angland. I'm sure there's more. I was in speech therapy for a while, which I called speech-a-therapy. One time I saw some scent therapy laundry detergent and asked my mum what the rapey kind was. I'm embarrassed. If I say the words slowly enough I can pronounce them, but I'm a fast talker, so when I speak my words get all jumbled up. There's 2 words I don't know how to say when that happens: ask and hyena. I don't remember what was said, all I know was I was talking to my friends and my sentence involved having to say ask. Once I said it, all my friends turned to look at me with an assumed astonished look on their face. They had thought I said axed. I kept having to repeat myself until finally I got fed up and said, "You know. Like I asked you a question. Ask." Let's just say I get made fun of till this day for it, probably because it still sounds like I'm saying axed. Hyena is just physically hard for me to say. I have no idea why. I pronounce it like hi, and, yeah. Colonel. Like WTF, what is English no more? I've been saying colonel, but it's actually colonel. Some other ones that are just funny, to me, humiliation. I pronounced it as humiliation, and world it wasn't because I can't pronounce it exactly, it was when I was in kindergarten to grade 2, I could pronounce the W in world properly. I was in SL, keep that in mind, so every time we practice the word world it always comes out as www. World or road, like I hold the W for so long just for rolled or road to come out my mouth. Just imagine some kid going like woo. World woo road r I can pronounce it now thom you. I am a teacher and I taught many students to pronounce salmon with an audible L and at. It was only a couple of years ago when I realized that my mother had been pronouncing it incorrectly all these years. I had learned the pronunciation from her. My third graders didn't know any better. Whoops. I hope someone tells them the correct pronunciation before they hit their mid-30s. Reticence. I thought it was reticence. In all honesty, I struggle to pronounce subtle correctly. Not because I don't know how to say it, but because I think it should be spoken without the B being silent. In my head, I pronounce the B spoken. I have to pause a half second to say it correctly. I also demanded that stripes should be stripities when I was 8 to 14 so I'm not the most reliable narrator. Mischievous. I was a senior and the teacher was doing popcorn reading, where one person starts and once they've done their section can pick a random student to pick up from there. My sentence was her mischievous, mischievous, smile. The teacher stopped me, said mischievous, mischievous, then told me to continue. I was mortified and tried to forget about it immediately, but as I was getting ready to leave the deaf girl in my class, the interpreters tapped me and asked, "Did you really say mischievous?" And I just said kind of. "What did you understand?" She let me know her interpreters had signed mischievous smile. Phantom iridescence, stop. Mischievous. Continue. And I just kind of went ah. I was studying ASL myself, so she knew she could ask me directly, but that just gave my mistake a whole new dimension, though I was impressed with the interpretation, to give her an idea of how embarrassing that exchange was. I do still think of mischievous every time I read that word. Every single time. In a similar vein, when we moved to the US I heard about people hiding things among their socks. So I bought myself my own sock jar as a kid. It wasn't until I was 25 when I broke my jar and was curious about where people kept their sock jars that I made a post about it and my best friend asked me what the fuck I was talking about. One of my ESL teachers pronounced drawer so similar to jar that I honest to God thought it was a sock jar and had kept my socks in a jar until I broke it 14 years later. Matt. My mom was obsessed with the French language, so I just always assumed Matt would be pronounced Matt, the way the French sometimes pronounce it. Thankfully, I never really had cause to use it, I just read it incorrectly for years until I heard someone else say it. My partner butchered the pronunciation of acetaminophen for way too long. Acetaminophen instead of acetaminophen. It is my favorite thing, and he gets pissy every time I ask him to give me the acetaminophen. Phlegm. It wasn't until high school grade 10 that I actually encountered the word in writing and had a reason to pronounce it. Before that, I just fucked it up in my head. But I somehow never needed to spell phlegm. So yeah, when it came up I felt begastupid. Later I realized this was just a fluke. That things ended up in the way that I never learned how to spell phlegm. Not so much of wrongly pronouncing it, but rather over the years the wrong, or the American, pronunciation became acceptable that I am now deemed to be the wrong one for context. I am in an area where British English is the officially adopted one. Celtics, I pronounce Celtics, but Celtics seems to overwhelm me nowadays. Route, I am used to route, but nowadays kept being corrected it as route. Ambience, for some reason there's an increased incidence people are pronouncing it French, ambiance. Spelling of kleptomania. The California intertie. It's a high-voltage DC power line that runs from, oversimplification here, Portland to Los Angeles. I was writing my master's thesis in environmental history and kept reading engineering documents referencing the intertie. First time I went to Portland to interview an actual engineer I said, "So tell me about the intertie." He was like, "Lol, what?" I said, "You know, the high-voltage direct current line that runs from Oregon to Social." He says, "Oh, the intertie. Yeah, it rhymes with tie-dye, not who is she?"